The Council of Education Ministers met last week to, of course, put several issues under the microscope that are currently happening in the basic education sector. One of those issues is, of course, the spate of violence in the schools that we have seen taking the nation by shock over recent weeks. So let's speak to Basic Education Minister Angie Motshekga just to update us in terms of how concerned are you as a sector as we're now dealing with this scourge of violence in our schools?
If there was a word beyond extreme, I would use it. We are extremely concerned about the spate of violence in our schools, learners against learners. But the last week one just think broke us. Not that other incidents are of less importance, but to have a young teacher, 24, have his life taken away by a youngster, the way it happened in Northwest, we really found it very shocking and extremely saddening.
You and, of course, your team are on your way to his family right now. What would your agenda be? It's an obvious question, but just to inform the nation.
No, it's just that it's time. I'm not able. I wanted to go to the school first because there's counseling taking place at school. It's a very quiet school, very quiet community, and there's been a need really to counsel because it happened in front of learners. We're writing exams in front of other teachers because I'm sure themselves are feeling shocked. So we'll start at the school to really help the school deal with the loss, go to the family and really to give our respects and our condolences. And if I had time, I'll even go to see this young fellow, face him and just really get to, I think for my sake, to really get to hear him out, to say, how dare.
One would assume that we're facing a crisis right now in our schools in the country when you see learners acting in such an aggressive manner. What is the interim plan to solve this, and what can we attribute this to?
You know, we discussed at length, both as ministers of education with the different provinces, but also ourselves within the department, to try and analyze and get an understanding. But it's not as if it's a new phenomenon because it's already been taking place. We've been dealing with questions of gangsters in schools. We've been dealing with matters of children bringing guns in schools, fighting amongst themselves. So we've really been dealing with the challenges on an ongoing basis. And as we reported here, we've worked with SABC. We have 19,000 of our schools connected to police stations. But the main threats are not around people attacking schools during school hours. If our schools are attacked, they're vandalized after hours. So there have been very few incidents of communities attacking children and robbing them in schools. The main problem has been in the schools themselves, that the schools themselves have become the threat to themselves because you have learners fighting amongst themselves, stabbing each other, killing each other. Now learners are attacking teachers. And it's a historical problem, but as I say, it is for us a major call. And when we analyze it, we find that it happens also in communities, not all of them, in communities where there's violence. I mean, this question of gangsters fighting in schools, it's in communities where there's high levels of gangsterism. Last week I went to open a school in the Western Cape, and I was warned to say we have to beef up our security because it's a gangster paradise. And when we got into schools, the primary schools, were told that just this year there have been 6 stabbings. And this is a primary school. So you can see that the school is a mirror of what is happening in society. When we deal with areas where there's lots of drugs, you also see that we have big problems of having to really deal with kids who are runners in our schools and all sorts of things. So again, it's challenges which are out there in the society being transported or being brought into the schools as a mirror of what is happening in schools. So it does happen, but you also have in Ramunzere, it's not a violent area. It's just an angry child because we're told this child, it's not the first time that there's been wrongdoing in his part. Early in the year, he was caught with drugs. So we are now dealing also with social problems or psychosocial problems of individual children in different schools and behaving in certain ways. So I think it's difficult to say this is what is causing it. It manifests itself differently in different communities.
Now, talking about the psychosocial approach that you highlighted earlier, saying perhaps that is the way to go right now. You even mentioned that teachers can protect themselves by identifying the problem pupils and perhaps finding a way to give them counseling or to intervene before things get out of control.
And the school committee, not the teachers themselves. For instance, Sufi had to deal with very difficult children in the school. And teachers, I think, had really become helpless and allowed these kids to run the school the way they wanted to run the school. So he had to come in as an MEC, break these kids, send them to different schools. And when he went to families, the parents were very happy that happened. So which means the parents themselves had lost control. The school itself was unable to manage the situation. And those are the things that we have to do to say, not only the psychosocial service, what instruments we bring in, where we can sometimes just expel summarily if we think you're a huge threat to the school. But that will be our last resort, because at the end of the day, we have a responsibility of making sure that if a child is in a school-going age, we protect them, even against themselves, so that they finish their school. So what we have to do is to really look at the different instruments that we have, how we strengthen them, but sometimes really find ways of taking drastic steps. But the other one will be your psychosocial. So when you can identify early identification and then say, what do we do with it? Here's an angry child who is really running drugs in schools. It's possibly trying to make ends, possibly, or it's a child who's really, even parents have given up, don't know what to do with the child, and see how we work with the family to support the child to go back to the right ways.
It's almost impossible to speak about the challenges in schools and the behavior of pupils without attaching the element of discipline. To what extent does that actually play a role, the lack of discipline in our schools, whether it is the failure of parents to discipline their children or just ill discipline within the school ambit?
I used to be a teacher trainer. One of the lines we used to tell our teacher trainees, if you can't discipline them, you can't teach them. So that's a starting point. They have to be willing to sit down, to listen, to take instructions. So if they can't just even do that basic, then you can't teach them. So discipline is just crucial, because it affects even the morale of, let alone that you can't do the basic business of teaching. If kids are rowdy, they don't take instructions, they don't listen, you can't teach them. But you can't run an institution again when, as I said, in that school that Yusuf was telling me about, where you have a group of boys who are just running amok, who will bully everybody around. You can't run that institution. So discipline is fundamental. It's one of the key issues. And this boy who killed the teacher, because he was being reprimanded, I'm told the teacher reprimanded him a day before. So which means he just refuses to be disciplined. And you can't teach, you can't run an institution, especially with young people, if you are not able to discipline them. So it's key and critical.
Now, to another issue, we're 34 days away from the matric exams, but you sound more positive, satisfied with the preparations. A little bit of concern you said in the Limpopo province. Can we speak about that?
Now, we need to calm down so that our kids don't panic and just get parents and appeal to parents to support them, because they're going through a very stressful period. There's been lots of pressure around your matric certificates, and it's like a make a do or die. So we really have to appeal to parents and committees to give them space, to give them the necessary support. And Limpopo, as you might recall, in the past 2 years, we've had difficulties with leaks in exams. And the problem with a leak, even at a school, even in one paper, it affects the integrity of your exams. So we have to make sure that there's not even a hole from any province, because it affects national results. You don't want to be told that you were a 2018 matriculant when there were papers free in there. So you have to protect the integrity of exams, and that's our concern about Limpopo. Not around broad preparations, but mainly around the protection of exams and leaks, and yeah.
And great news for one of Africa's oldest languages, Swahili.
I'm excited.
Just bring us up to date with that.
I'm really excited about it, really, because we're offering more than 15 languages in our country, which are your second additional languages of French, German, Serbia, everything else. But we've not been able to offer an African language. For the first time, as South Africa and as part of the continent, we'll be offering Kiswahili in our schools. It's a highly spoken language in the continent, and I just really think, even for the whole exercise of this or just being part of this dialogue or talk about decolonization, to really again get our kids to focus, to say we're Africans first, here's an African language, it's being offered, study it, and be able to speak to a Kenyan without using English. It's going to be a beautiful exercise. It's just that the resources are very restricting. We have to pilot it incrementally, not even pilot, because it's been taught a lot in the continent. So there's material for it, there's skills for teaching it, there are people who can teach it. The whole thing is just getting adequate resources to roll it out, because these other languages have an advantage of very strong motherland. French speaking, France will support the teaching of French, and Germany will support the teaching of German, Italy, the teaching of, and even those communities themselves, because we don't have a Kiswahili community. Here you have your French community, you have a German community, you have a Chinese community, so they support their languages. But Kiswahili comes with some disadvantages that it doesn't have a mother. We are all motherland. Even ourselves, we're motherland, we have to support it. But also it doesn't have, as I say, Kiswahili community per se, in a very clear way that supports its teachers. So we'll see what happens. But I'm very excited about the prospect of teaching Kiswahili in our country.
Thank you so much. Of course, they Basic Education Minister, Angie Motshekga. They're just highlighting the good and the bad in the sector currently. And as we all know, the violence in the country school, that is the major concern right now. But her and her team giving the affirmation that a lot is being done to address that particular issue and make sure that the integrity, dignity and credibility is restored in the country schools.